Hello everybody, it's Captain Mark here again to answer another viewer's question, and this one comes from a lady called Rachel. And Rachel and her husband own a 60-foot long narrowboat. What's that, about 20 meters long, and it weighs about 25 tons, and her question is about anchoring. She says that her husband and her are about to enter a new area of the canals, and to get there she has to cross a river or go up a river, and that means she needs to take an anchor, and they've never used one before and they don't know what it's about. So Rachel, I hope to answer your question in very basic terms using a few props that I have available, such as my little wooden ship, my anchor made out of 2 paper clips complete with the blades, which we call flukes, anchor chain, and anchor rope. If I put them all together by fastening my chain to my anchor with a shackle and my rope to my chain with a shackle, this would be the normal anchoring rig on a narrowboat. So the anchor would be around about 20 to 25 kilograms, normally a Danforth type anchor. Attached to that you would normally have a piece of galvanized chain around about 4 to 5 meters in length, and attached to that you would normally have a piece of polypropylene rope around about 10 meters in length. So before we get started, I'm not going to use a lot of technical terms, so if you've come here for that, wrong video. I'm just going to use my Hollywood special effects with my boat to show you what's going on. First of all, why do we use an anchor at all? Well, basically an anchor is to hold any floating object, whether it be a huge VLCC oil tanker or a small buoy, any floating object, including your narrowboat, Rachel. It holds it in position against any external forces that there might be. So here we're talking about wind, current, tide in a river, that sort of thing. If there was none of those, then the ship would just sit there quite happily and not move at all. As soon as you introduce tide, wind and current, then she's going to start to move relative to the land and seabed around her. So we use the anchor and chain to hold her in position. The other use of an anchor is in an emergency. For instance, if you have an engine failure or loss of control, such as you're being pushed towards a weir in a canal by the current and you're struggling to control your narrowboat, you can use the anchor to hold her while you regain control. It's a common misconception that the anchor is what holds the ship, your narrowboat, in place. It's not. It's a combination of the anchor and the chain, and I hope to do a little demonstration using my Hollywood special effects to try and demonstrate that in a few moments. On my ship I have 2 anchors. Each anchor weighs 5 tons, and attached to that on each side is around about 300 meters of anchor chain. Now when you consider that my ship weighs 46,000 tons and I have an anchor of 5 tons plus the chain, that anchor and chain will hold the ship quite happily in 35-40 knots of wind. There are loads of different types of anchor, but for the purpose of this video I'll tell you that on my ship we have an anchor called an AC-14. As I said before, it weighs about 5 tons. And for canal waters and bays, I would suggest that the Danforth anchor is probably the most suitable, and that weighs around 20 to 25 kilograms. There are lots of others, but let's just talk about the Danforth anchor in this particular video. The art of anchoring is way beyond the scope of this video because that's a subject in itself, but actually talking about it is harder than doing it. One thing to remember is that once you've put an anchor down, whatever external forces are acting on this ship or your narrowboat will try and swing the bow of the ship or the stern, if you've got the anchor out the stern, towards those external forces. That means that if you are in a river and the flow, using another Hollywood prop, is this way, and you put an anchor down, whichever way the ship is lying, she will swing towards the current. So you can imagine that if you are going down current and you put an anchor over the bow because you lose control, immediately the anchor chain tightens, the ship will turn round towards the current. So will your narrowboat in a river. The same is true of the wind. If you are coming up head to wind and you drop the anchor, then she will lie like this. My ship does this. She goes all over the place, but she will normally sort of range backwards and forwards around the direction of the wind. Now, when you have a wind and current, then the ship will lie roughly in the middle of both of them. But it's important to remember that for most ships, the current is always stronger than the wind. We figure that 1 knot of current is about 20 knots of wind. So you can see that current is the major influence. And on a river and in an estuary, it may well be that that is the case. So always remember, if you can, in a controlled environment, always approach the anchor position with the bow of your vessel pointing towards the external force that's acting upon her. So if you're in a river, you always face the current. If it's a strong wind and you're in a bay, face the wind. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in my Hollywood demonstration. We also need to consider what the seabed, the riverbed, is made of. You can imagine that if the anchor falls on rock and stones, it just gets pulled along and doesn't bite with these blades that I was talking about. If it's sand or clay, then it can really dig in and hold against a much stronger external force. So we have to remember that the better the holding ground that the anchor can bite into, the less chain that you need. The worse the holding ground, in other words, rocks, stones, the more chain you need. Let me try and make it easier by showing what I'm talking about using my homemade props here. So here we are. I'm going to try and demonstrate what I've been talking about with a few of my homemade props here. So here is my narrowboat, Rachel, your 60-foot narrowboat. Here is your Danforth anchor with a length of chain, 4 to 5 meters of chain, and then 10 meters of polypropylene rope fastened to it. This is the direction of the flow of the current, whether you're in the River Trent, wherever you are. So this is the direction of the flow. So the current is coming this way. So here we go. In the front of your ship, in the bow of your narrowboat, is your anchor with somebody who's about to throw it. And don't forget, the most important thing is the end of the rope bit must be fastened to your boat. If you don't, when you throw the anchor out and the boat moves, you're going to lose everything and your boat's going to drift away. So you're coming towards where you want to drop the anchor. Don't forget, here's the flow. So you're coming towards the flow, and when you get in position with your engine, you stop, and you're using just enough revolutions to hold the ship in place, your boat in place, and we let go the anchor down. There she goes. So now the anchor lies on the seabed and or the riverbed, and the construction of the anchor is such that the blades will always end up facing down, and they bite into the riverbed like this. Then we slowly move our boat back until we get the chain out and we hold her here. Now you can see that the chain is lying on the bed of the river, the seabed, wherever you're anchoring, and it is this that holds the ship in place. So as she moves with the tide and the wind, you can see that the anchor does not move. All the time it is this that is holding it in place. This bit here we call the catenary. Don't worry about the name, but basically what it does, it acts as a shock absorber. No matter what the ship is doing, the anchor doesn't move. Now, what can happen is if the tide gets too strong or the wind starts to blow and move the ship away from the anchor, you can see that the chain is now lifted off the seabed, and if you keep going, the anchor will be pulled out of the seabed, the riverbed, and you will start to move. So it is essential that you put out enough chain. My anchor, need to put my anchor back in my seabed again. There we go. And a rough rule of thumb, whatever the depth of water is, put out 5 times that in the length of the chain. Always better to have more chain out than you think is necessary. Chain stuck in the locker on the ship will do nothing. Chain on the seabed will help. So if it starts to drag, you put out more. I'm getting myself all tangled here. You put out more. So now you can see the chain is lying back on the seabed, and you keep putting out more to keep that chain on the seabed, because I said before, this is what's holding the ship. So as the external influence starts to pull the ship, it is always trying, this chain is always trying to hold the anchor in the same position. So the wind can blow and the ship can move as much as it wants, but the anchor never moves. So the rule of thumb is chain on the seabed, chain on the riverbed will help you. Chain in the locker on board does nothing. So get it out, and get it out quick. Now it is possible to throw your anchor over the stern, and the reason you would do that is if you're going ahead and you have an engine failure, throwing your anchor over the stern can actually arrest your forward movement. You don't see anchors on the stern of many ships. There are some, but not many, because the problem with that is you can end up with rope in your propeller and damaging your rudders. But don't forget, we're talking about an emergency situation here. So if you are anywhere and you have an engine failure, get that anchor out as soon as you possibly can. That is the key to this. And once again, make sure that the end of your chain, the end of your line, is fastened to a strong point on the ship. Don't forget, this is going to be holding the entire weight of your ship in an emergency, your narrowboat in an emergency. So make sure that is fastened to something strong. One of your cleats, one of your bow fender, mooring points, something like that. And another good tip is when you do have your polypropylene line, get a piece of wool and just with a needle thread it through the rope at 5 meters, because this is going to be 10 meters long and you're always wondering how much is left or how much you're going to put out compared to the depth of water. So a good tip is about 5 meters from the chain to here, just put a little flag of red wool, I don't know, about 6 inches long, tied through in a knot, and as the rope is going out, you'll know that you've only got 5 meters left until the end of the rope. I think I've covered everything. I hope that helped. If you liked the video and the use of my props, which cost me a total of 0, it's what I had in the drawer in the office, please subscribe, please like, tell your friends, and leave a comment in the section below with any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye now.